By her own account, our guest today on In the Studio writes preposterous 1930s detective stories about an aristocratic sleuth, darker contemporary psychological thrillers, and comedies set in the last ditch motel in what she calls a fictionalized California. She has just introduced a fresh character in her latest novel, In Place of Fear, which, again, by her own account, finally marries her love of historicals with her own working class roots. I'm talking about Catriona McPherson, a native Scot whom we are now lucky to call our neighbor here in Davis. By the way, I have also been able to piece together from different sources that Catriona loves pie and includes ironing on a list of likes. Maybe we'll hear a little bit about that later. Catriona, welcome to In the Studio on Davis Media Access.
Thank you very much for having me. I need to say, though, when I say pie, it's savory. It's not American pie, which is also delicious.
Well, okay, that changes
Yeah.
things. But anyway, so you've actually got two new books out this year, if I've got it correct, two new books out in 2022. In Place of Fear, which is your 12th standalone novel. And I guess that this is one of the darker contemporary psychological thrillers. And then you've also got out Scot Missed, the fourth installment in the Lexi Campbell series. That's the series set in the so-called fictionalized California town. Spoiler alert, I guess it's actually Davis, but you call it Cuento.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is on top of 15 Dandy Gilver books in the Dandy Gilver series. And I guess those would be the preposterous 1930s detective stories. So by my count, that's 31 books. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. There's always a few in the pipe, so I'm never quite sure. But I know it's over 30. Okay. I remember 30. Yeah.
And that's over how long a period of time now that you've been writing?
Since the turn of the millennium. I started in 2000. I started, yeah. So quite a while.
Great, quite a while. Well, that's still quite a pace. Well, let's start with In Place of Fear then. And I think you have a passage or a section of that you wanted to read to us.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to read from the prologue. I don't adhere to Elmore Leonard's weird ban on prologues. It's very short, so specs on. And this is more or less 1,000 years of history of the city of Edinburgh in one page. And I can explain some bits of it afterwards if necessary, Tim. Okay, here we go. Edinburgh keeps her secrets. She was built on them. The streets of the old town slumped in the dark behind close mouths. The sweep to the new town laid over filth. If anyone knew, striding down the mound, that underfoot was a midden of effluence, certainly no one showed it. That was Edinburgh's way. Bridges were built not over water, not to join islands, but to lift the merchant ladies up above the fag ends of the old streets below, still down there, lightless and reeking. A deacon by day was a thief by night in Edinburgh. A doctor needing corpses could always get them. A sleeping volcano crouched over the city, and not a merchant, not a lady, not a deacon, not a doctor gave it a thought. They called it a park, fed ducks there. The sturdy new houses for weavers and workmen were built for secrets just the same. Upstairs neighbours with their doors to the back, and downstairs neighbours with their doors to the front. They knew one another from creaks, from shuffles. Living inches apart with only a floor between, hearing water in pipes and the scrape of a coal shovel, they never met. Their secrets stayed as safe as a whisper inside the stone walls, as safe as a cat in the shadows. So, of course, no one found her. Of course, no one looked. She was days there, weeks into months, stiffening and softening, mouldering, just the latest dark shame in a black-hearted city, unmourned, unmissed, unseen. So there you go, wall-to-wall chuckles, right? I mean, that's my city, it's my home city, and I love it. But the deacon, the person who was a deacon by day and a thief by night, was the inspiration for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was written in Edinburgh. And the doctor needing corpses got them from Burke and Hare. And there is a volcano. It's not, it's, what do you call it, extinct in the city, that it functions as a park. also that they built the way from the old town to the new town over a dump, over filth, and it's all very fancy, but it's kind of disgusting underneath it. It's my city. Those are my people.
So you really sort of articulated, I think, one of the ways you approach these novels. I mean, it's a mystery novel. There's going to be a murder that needs to be solved, but you have all of these really interesting historical details in it. And I'm just wondering, generally as a writer, whether it's this novel or any other, I mean, how important is this historical context? I mean, in this case, it's post-war Scotland and Britain, but it's also class and gender issues. So how important is that for telling your story? And how does that part of it weigh against the importance of the plot itself?
It's very central to this novel. I think when I started writing historicals, and I started with them in 1922, the first one was called After the Armistice Ball, so that puts it right in the just after the First World War. It wasn't about history or place really at all. It was more about an homage to that golden age of detective fiction that I always loved, the stuff that was written then, and I wanted to write some more. And the history crept up on me. All of a sudden it was 1926 and it was the general strike. And then all of a sudden it was 1929 and there was the stock market crash. So it was the process of writing books set at that time that made the history intrude. But the setting, the geographical setting for this is very important. It's very squarely set in my city. It starts on the 4th of July, 1948, which is the day before the birth of the National Health Service. So it's really specific, and it's very specific about the house. These houses that are, one downstairs and one upstairs, and the neighbours come in and out either side. They're all over the city. I don't think they're anywhere else, but they're all over Edinburgh. And they've always fascinated me because you live so close to someone, but you're on a different street. You never meet them. For the modern novels, the setting's important, but only to make it work for me. So if I need a flooded village that's now hiding under a reservoir, I'll go there. Or if I need a depressed industrial town, I'll go there.
Uh-huh. And I'm curious, the historical elements in these books. After finishing one of these novels, do you feel like you have a different understanding of that period? I mean, again, you got these historical details that you probably had to learn about, some of which maybe you knew, some of which you learned to write the book. But I'm curious whether you have any sort of new broad understanding of a period, or say in this case, I mentioned the class and gender issues, any new, broad understanding of class and gender after writing a book like this?
I mean, I think I've been steeped in it. I read the contemporary fiction of the period always, and I've always been interested in it. I think what I get from working on the period myself is a realization of how stylized and sanitized some of the fiction about that period. To give you an example, here's the best example. There was a huge flowering of detective fiction in the 20s in Britain, in the UK. And no one ever mentioned Spanish flu. It just doesn't exist. No minor character, no death is explained in an Agatha Christie because they died of the flu. It was just gone. So much so that I didn't even know it had happened. I didn't study 20th century history, and in all my reading of the period, it was just gone. And so there's things like that either weren't of interest or were studiously avoided by the writers of the time. And it's happening again now. There are my fellow writers, many of them are saying we're going to write about the 2020 and 2021, just the other version where it didn't happen. We're not going to address it. So
okay, well, we'll get
things
to
like
it
that
in a moment.
yeah, things like
talk
that
about
certainly.
Scott,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and gender, I think the main thing I learned about gender roles back then was we hear things like women didn't work and everything was very proper. And then when you look at it for, it doesn't take very long, what you realize was rich women didn't work, and rich women, working women have always worked. And also middle class life was very proper. Working class women and aristocratic women were quite bawdy and not at all concerned with, daintiness. It was the middle class who had a kind of hegemony on the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we get the idea that nothing shocking ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said, I was listening to someone in an interview saying sex was in its infancy in the 40s. So that kind of idea.
Shifting just a little bit, but again, with maybe with reference to this latest novel, was there anything you did stylistically or technically in Place of Fear that you hadn't done before?
No, I don't think so. I think this one, the one that I'm editing right now, yes, I've got three protagonists and two of them are men. I've never done that before except in a short story. But this one was Helen Crowther's story, and it's her voice, and it feels like a voice, even though she's 26 in 1948. It feels like a voice that's very close to home. And certainly I could phone my mum and ask for help with some of the kind of most annoying little bits of research. So no, I don't think so. Structurally, this time, I've told a tale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and then there's Lexi Campbell. Can you tell us a little bit about this series? And of course, we'll be all interested to hear about the setting in this town called Quento, which may actually be our own city of Davis.
Definitely.
So what can you tell us about this series in general, and then this latest installment, Scot Missed?
Yeah, that's very, very close to home. That started when my editor said, we want another series from you, as well as the Aristocratic Lady Sleuth set in Scotland in the 30s. We would like something modern. We'd like something set in the USA. We'd like, and I said, I can't write an American book. I'd only been here for 6 years. I can't write an American book. And I thought, I could make the voice character, the point of view character, Scot. And she said, yes, that would be perfect. And she wanted them to be comedies. So this was an idea that was thrashed out, with an editor and then contracted. It didn't bubble up out of my belly. But very quickly, I thought, well, that would just be so much fun to put a Scot in what a fellow writer, Eileen Rendell, calls Schmavis, California. It's absolutely Davis. There are little Easter eggs that people from Davis will recognize if they read the books. And I made her a marriage and family therapist as well, because I just thought that is the funniest thing I've ever thought of. A Scot, don't really believe in happiness, we're very buttoned. To think of someone trying to counsel Californians who are much more evolved and better at being happy and find it respectable to want to be happy, not silly to want to be happy. It just makes me laugh every time I think about it. So that was Lexi Campbell.
Yeah, I'm curious just on this naming the town and the so-called fictionalized town. And why did you bother to call it Quento? Why not call it Davis? I mean, after all, Edinburgh gets full respect.
Well, I've changed it a bit.
In Place of Fear.
I've changed it a little bit, but just to make it manageable. What happens, with the road? If you come down E Street and you go under the railway to South Davis, that doesn't exist. So in Quento, Spanish for story, it's not very clever, but that's why it's called that. Under there's just the Last Ditch Motel, the police station's under there, there's a self-storage facility, and then dusty tomato fields all the way to fictionalized Dixon. So it's only half Davis. So it's not quite, but it is Davis. There's UCC, UC Quento is there, except that the students live in tree houses, not domes. So it just gives me a little bit more freedom, and it's fun. I've got a list of the Schmavis quiz on my website. Here are the Easter eggs. Can you tell why the county town is called Madding instead of Woodland? That kind of thing. It's harmless fun. And it suits the books because they're comedies. I mean, they're absolutely comedies.
Right. Well, speaking of the fun, I mean, one of the things you have a lot of fun with, I would imagine, as the author, and I certainly had a lot of fun reading it, is with the language that you use, and the fact that you have this Scot in the United States using her language, and her dialogue is sprinkled with terms and phrases and metaphors that are unintelligible in some cases to her American friends and others she comes across in Quento and at the Last Ditch Motel, and they create some really humorous moments. And I wondered, you said a moment ago, sort of talked about the genesis of this, but I wonder also if either if this was a motivation or if simply you've really embraced it afterwards, after having started the series, this opportunity to really have fun with these, two language. It's English, it's all English, but it's almost like two languages sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It happened all the time when I first moved here. I've been here 12 years now, and I'm not trying to, I haven't stopped speaking British English because I don't want to be unable to write my books. I don't want to make mistakes, but I can translate now. But it used to happen most days someone would go, what? What are you talking about? So it was fun to put all that in. And it goes both ways. They don't understand her. She doesn't understand them. And then maybe in the second or the third book, they decide that they're all going to assimilate. So her American friends start to use UK profanities and slang, and she tries to use very hip, cool American English, which is intensely irritating for everyone involved. So they have the equivalent of a swear jar. They're not allowed to do that anymore. I should say these friends, my idea of her living in a motel is because she's broke, but she was going to live in a motel because then everyone else there would be transient. They'd come for one book, one of them would die, and then one of them would go to jail and then, reset for night. But I just fell in love with them all. So I changed it so that they're permanent residents. So everyone in that motel who's not Lexi was not supposed to be the owner and the person who runs the laundrette and living there permanently. I just gathered them in. I have no discipline at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering too if I could say one more thing or ask one more thing about the language, in that I don't think I mentioned it in your bio, which I just plucked shamelessly from I think from your Twitter page actually. But you have a PhD in linguistics and taught for a little while. You know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But how does your training as a linguist play into this at all? Or could you have done this even without that training?
Probably, but the editors would have had to be much more vigilant, because I'm not, I know what I don't know is the best way to put it. So I know that I will never understand when speakers of American English use bring and take. It makes no sense to me. I'm going to bring someone to the hospital. You're not at the hospital. How can you bring someone to the hospital when you're not there? So there's just subtle grammatical differences. I'm not a native speaker of that variety of English, but I know I'm not. So I can flag up what to tell the editor to check in case I've got it wrong. And I can go through and check the American dialogue and change every got to gotten and things like that. So some of it's fun and some of it's given me the humility to know that I'll never be a native speaker of American English. So someone's got to help me. And it's the grammar. I mean, the vocabulary, you can work it out. Well, there was a incident where my sister, also Scottish, yelled across the Yolo County SPCA, "Do you think it's disgusting to buy second-hand rubbers?" So things like that. Oh, wow. Yes, a strong yes. It means running shoes where I come from, tennis shoes.
Okay. Well, it also means an eraser, doesn't it?
Oh yes. So you buy children a new rubber for the start of the school term. Yeah. It's a whole thing.
And if you're in school, you might knock up your neighbor to see if they've got a rubber you could borrow, right?
That's right. That's English though. That's not Scottish, because that's in Jane Austen.
Oh, that's British.
Fanny
okay.
was quite
knocking
Fanny
up
was
meaning
quite
to just
up.
go and
Yes.
say hello to somebody.
Yeah.
let me ask you one more general question, if I could, about your writing, because I found a quote from you, and you probably hate this when people read back to you something you've said before, but it's really fascinating to me.
On me.
You once wrote, "My most surprising discovery is how much more like exploration and less like creation writing is than I would have expected." Um, so
Yeah.
if I got that right, first of all, I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it sounds like I don't remember saying that, but it's something I believe. You know, that's they always say the benefit of telling the truth is you don't have to remember what you said. Yes, I write very organically. So I start with a germ of an idea that's bugging me. It's like a pebble in my shoe, or it's fizzing, and the pressure builds, and I start to write to get rid of it. And I write the first draft through from page 1 to the end without editing and without even reading. So it's it doesn't feel entirely conscious, and then I usually leave the book for a month, and when I go back to it, there's no familiarity about what I've written there. It doesn't seem as if I read it, and I don't feel in control of what's going to happen. So I write murder mysteries. It's very, very seldom that I know who done it before I write the end of the book. And I'm quite often very surprised. And I remember once I was writing a first draft, and 2 characters were waiting for the tide to go out so that they could walk over to a corpse that had been tied to a lobster pot full of rocks in the sea. And the tide eventually went out, and they walked over the beach and turned it over, and it wasn't who I thought it was. And I remember thinking, oh, well, that's annoying, because this is going to take quite a lot of rewriting now. That's not what I thought was going to happen, but it turned out okay. This is anathema to some other writers. Eileen Rendell, another Davis author who coined the Schmavis subgenre title, absolutely, breaks out in hives if I talk about my process like that. And I can't imagine the spreadsheety way that she does hers. But yeah, that's true. I don't feel like I'm in charge.
That's great. Well, that's all the time we have, Catriona. But thank you so much. And indeed, the latest books from native Scot and now Davis resident Catriona McPherson are Scot Mist, the 4th installment in the Lexi Campbell series that was released earlier this year, and then In Place of Fear, Catriona's latest standalone novel, out in June of 2022. Well, I'm Tim Gaffaney. Thank you all for joining us here with our very fun interview with Catriona McPherson on In the Studio on Davis Media Access.
Thank you.